Kia ora, guys. I am Chris Clancy. I'm going to be filling in for Sherry today. She had a bit of an emergency, so I know she was going to be here talking about the Enlightenment. I'm just going to and go over the Enlightenment with you. So you are in the right place. You are not imagining things, and I hope you will enjoy today's stream. So let's get started right away. So Enlightenment. Again, this is me, a European history teacher, as well as an AP world history teacher and an AP psychology teacher in the United States. And I just recently moved to New Zealand. So I am joining you from the future. Remember that you follow at Think Fiveable on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, on all of the social media platforms. This is how we send out updates and events with you guys to get feedback. We do giveaways, things like that. You can follow me as well if you'd like on Twitter. It's at USTeachInNZ. If you'd like, I tweet out all the things Think Fiveable does, and I also tweet out about the cast for AP Euro. So just make sure you follow us on all of these. Today, we are going to be going over the Enlightenment. What caused the Enlightenment? What exactly is social media? Is the Enlightenment? Some certain thinkers and the ideas that they had that typically do show up on the AP exam. Deism, which I think is probably one of the most in some past, and then the effects of the Enlightenment on Europe and the wider world. So we're starting to advance from this tiny little close-up microscopic view of Europe into a more global view of Europe's interactions with the world in the 1700s and how the spread of European ideas are affecting the world. If you joined me yesterday when I did the cast on the comparison between absolutism and enlightenment, this is a great way to follow it up because enlightenment comes out of that development. It is an idea that will be contrasting at one end and also complementing at the other end. The ideas of both enlightenment and constitutionalism. Remember that enlightenment is not a one-size-fits-all. Not all enlightened thinkers believed in the same things. Not all enlightened monarchs believed in the same things. Some of them used very particular parts of the Enlightenment to further their goals. Just as not all absolute monarchs were completely absolute, like in Sweden, and not all constitutional monarchs were completely constitutional, like King Charles II of England. So with anything in history, there's always these wonderful shades of gray. You have to take everything with this great grain of salt, and its applications aren't so black and white. Okay, just keep that in the back of your mind as we go over everything. So there are quite a few things that cause the Enlightenment. You've got scientific revolution. All right, the scientific revolution, in my opinion, probably the main reason, because it changed the way people thought about the natural world. It forced to use reason, to use logic and empiricism rather than just beliefs. They had to test something was that way or disprove that it was another way. And they had to use logic to get there. The idea of proving yourself, the idea that we're going to follow very specific steps to get there is what is going to lead people to start thinking that maybe it should be following that same idea. That if we're going to tax somebody, we're going to tax them for a war, what are all of the reasons that we're going to this? The scientific revolution also did this wonderful thing in showing people of it's showing the power that we can have if we put ourselves in a rather than just accepting, we question. That is in direct contrast to the teachings of the church. The teachings of the church, the human mind are the mysteries of the universe, that those are God's mysteries and his alone. It directly challenged the power of the church as well, because being your place in the world, you could also question your place in society. And that's a threat not just to the church, that's a threat to the powers as well, and the nobility. Eventually, these ideas lead to what we call deism, which we're going to talk about. And enlightenment also is going to come out of absolutism itself. Okay, absolutism, remember that most of them, they do combine the church and So in France, it was King Henry XIV. He said, "La état c'est moi," the state and I, or I am the state. He's basically saying that whatever I am, everybody else has to be. So if he's Catholic, everybody of Nantes and replaces it with Edict of Fontainebleau, reinforcing that everybody has to be Catholic. It's the same in Russia when you have Jesus Catholic. He gets rid of the Edict of the Great, that everybody is Russian. In Prussia, everyone is Lutheran. So we have in state, England did not. You were taxed. So under absolutism, we do see a massive abuse of power. We know that absolute follow the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so the lower classes, especially the peasants, who are going to be hurt the most during this. Excuse me, I apologize. And absolutism really doesn't give them a chance to expand upon their situation. They don't get to grow, and they don't get to move up the social. These are not the only reasons that are going to spur the Enlightenment. You also have the new findings that are coming from the new. So colonialism is going to further the Enlightenment. Interactions with the Arab world are going to further. The Renaissance, the Europeans found that the Arabs had preserved the teachings of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and Euclid, and all of the famous Greek and Roman philosophers. Rediscovering those also meant that they're rediscovering different political ideas and different societal ideas. And that's one of the ways that interactions with East Asia, the ideas of Buddhism and Shintoism and Taoism will have an effect on the idea of oneself within society and how does one within society. They're just probably the primary reasons that we can think about with the Enlightenment. Just keep in the back of your mind that they are overlapping. So you've got the scientific revolution, absolutism, Enlightenment. You still have the Renaissance going on to a certain degree here. So always keep that in the back of your mind that it's overlapping time period. Enlightenment, what is it? Roughly speaking, we can say that it's from 1650, give or take, to 1800s, give or take. This is a time frame of logic. It's the time of reason. It's the time where we take science and we apply it to make society better. I know it's a common, funny argument that my husband and I have all the time, social sciences, and that they're not really a science. This is where we get that idea from, that we take the scientific method created by Francis Bacon and we apply it to making society better. So the problem, we have a hypothesis, we're going to test it, we're going to take the data, we're going to draw some conclusions, and if we need to, we're going to change everything and start all over again. And that's what the Enlightenment really does. It's just one big, massive experiment. How can we make the lives of everybody better? The Enlightenment does cause people to challenge authority. It causes people to question the traditional roles of the nobility, of the king, the traditional roles of men and women in society. And it challenges them to not just look at it as challenging it for the challenge, in a way that will make it better for everybody. This is the timeism. The Scottish theorist who's the father of modern skepticism, I'll look it up and I will post it when I find him. Basically, it's a time to question everything and anything. Okay. When I was in high school, our Latin teacher, we created a t-shirt for our class, and it had René Descartes' famous saying on it: "Cogito ergo, I therefore I am." Skeptic would go, "Cogito ergo sum, cogito." I think, therefore I am. I think. Time to question the very nature of existence itself, the nature of God, the nature of Christ. The nature of religion. Do we need religion? Do we need even to have anarchism is going to start in its modern form. So the Enlightenment, it's this wonderful time period where you can question without being the worried of the accusation of witch, right? Because we know that after the Protestant Reformation, those that questioned society, those that were questioning the church, whether it was the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church, were oftentimes accused of witchcraft. Well, now we're in a time frame where you can question and you won't automatically be accused of witchcraft. So this is a very important term. You need to know this term, write this term down, highlight this term, love this term. You must know this term. Cannot stress that enough. This will show up on the AP exam in one form or another. Okay, philosophes, it is a French term. Obviously, it does bear resemblance to the word philosopher. Okay, and that's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about Enlightenment thinkers. Now, they're not necessarily philosophers. Some of them weren't, but most of them were just very particular in the things that they looked at. They didn't philosophize, if that's a word, about, everything. They were very, particular in, I'm going to look at the state of nature versus the state of man. Things like that, social contract theory. So philosophes, you've got to know philosophes. You've got to know the philosophes, which we're about to go over, and you need to remember that they're very important, not just for AP Euro. A lot of you are going to be taking a push. This is setting you up to understand the development of the United States Constitution, as well as understanding the development of our political system here in America. Okay. So with that, we got some of the more famous philosophes here on the left. Starting with the first one, we have Cesare Beccaria. Cesare Beccaria, he's an Italian. He was very much interested in the idea of reforming criminal law. He was against the use of capital punishment as well as torture. That's the first time that we see somebody writing that the use of capital punishment or the death penalty is against the morals of the time frame, stating that to kill somebody is to commit murder in and of itself. And so we can't kill somebody who has killed somebody else. His ideas obviously took a long time to take off. Beccaria was not very well known throughout the world like some of the other ones. And his ideas are a criminal justice system. Almost knowledge do not have the death penalty. A few countries still do. I think the European bloc. But most of them don't. They all have some form or another of a progressive where you get put in jail for a certain amount of time up to life in prison. But that's it. That all comes from Beccaria. In America, we have gone back and forth on the whole idea of the use of the capital punishment or the death penalty. For a long time, we had death penalty. We had hanging. That was our death penalty. We eventually did move to the use of the electric chair. And then in the early 1900s, it was deemed to be unconstitutional, and it was taken away. And then it was around the 1970s, I think it was. There was a Supreme Court case that came in and challenged the whole no capital punishment. Want to say it was in Oregon. Memory serves me correctly. I'll have to go and look that up for you. And the Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment is legal and it does not violate the Eighth Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. The only way it doesn't violate the amendment is if the prisoner feels no pain. So we can't hang you because there's too many ways that you could feel pain or be tortured. Because if the executioner doesn't get it right and you drop, normally what happens is you drop and it snaps your neck. As the executioner doesn't calculate the amount of rope to your weight correctly, you end up being strangled to death. Or even worse, your head just pops off. When it comes to the electric chair, you don't always die the first time. You don't always die the second time. Sometimes you don't die until the third time the chair has been turned on. Therefore, it's considered torture, so we can't use it. That is why we now use in almost all states that do have the death penalty, they use lethal injection. But again, you can't just inject somebody with the drug to kill them. You have to first calm them down, put them to sleep, stop the heart, stop the breathing, and then they'll die. You can't just go straight to stopping the heart and breathing. So we do have his influence in American law. We do have a very strong argument on both sides of the equation. Should we have capital punishment? Shouldn't we have capital punishment? But he is very important in law ethics for modern day criminal law. Denis Diderot is a French philosophe living in the time of the beginnings of the French Revolution. He dies at the early stages of it. He is the one who is the first to create the encyclopedia. Wasn't necessarily what you and I would think of as an encyclopedia. It's not like I could look up, in his book Montesquieu and it's going to tell me everything about him. At that time, it was more a collection of all the known science and political thought of the day. It wasn't organized in a very specific manner like ours is, usually alphabetical or topical. But what it did do is it's the first attempt to gather all known knowledge in one place. Diderot's thoughts on women's rights as well as a revolutionary for the time. He was a very big feminist, very well known for the advocation of education for all, not just for the rich elite. So he is very important in the sense that you are here watching this cast and sitting in your school when you do because of people like him who said education should be open to all. We have Immanuel Kant. He was a German philosopher, German thinker, wrote about ethics and the idea of transcendental idealism. Not the biggest fan of Kant. He's also, if memory serves me correctly, he's the one that said God is dead. That might be Nietzsche. I think it is Nietzsche, never mind. Yes, Nietzsche said God is dead. But it's very German in its ideas anyways. And that sounds weird to say it that way, but when we think of Germany, we usually think of very rigid. Everything has its place, everything has its time, and it's not very humorous, right? Stereotypes, obviously, of Germany and of German ideas and thoughts. But his ideas on ethics, though, were groundbreaking because his ideas on ethics are rooted in humanity rather than the Bible. Which is very new for this time period. People still in this time period were religious. Okay, it's not like they just all of a sudden said, "Oh, I don't believe in God." Okay, remember we have that separation of religious life and our secular life. Montesquieu is incredibly important to the United States Constitution. Montesquieu was the man who came up with the idea of separation of power. He was living in the time of the French Absolutists. So 1700s under Louis XV and XVI. Montesquieu, though, the funny thing, he was a nobleman. A lot of people don't know that about him. We normally think of these philosophers as being bourgeois or being the rich middle class, or maybe even the lower class that has gotten lucky and gotten an education. We don't typically think of the nobility as the ones to come up with, wait, let me give up some of my power. But Montesquieu believed that that was necessary. He believed that the idea of an absolute monarch, or even a monarchy at all, was bad. Because if you have all of the power in one person, then they can abuse that power. It always goes back to the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so Montesquieu said we should separate the power. You necessarily didn't specify how we should separate it. What he did come up with is he did come up with the idea of the parliament and of the executive and the judicial branch, but he didn't design how it was going to be separated. He just believed that if we devolved power, it prevented the abuse of power. And it's a really great idea that if it had been implemented in France, quite possibly the French Revolution might have been avoided or might not have been as bloody. But Montesquieu would not live to see that realization in France because he would die before that would happen. Excuse me. Then you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is one of three philosophers who work with what we call social contract theory. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, as I said, he's the one who did Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And he comes up with a social contract theory. Now, in schools, you may have actually done this before. First day of school, first week of school, you guys always come up with a classroom contract or social contract. I'm sorry to tell you, that is not a social contract, okay? Social contracts are not agreeing to be nice, agreeing to be kind, agreeing to, be respectful and things like that. I used to get in trouble with my principal all the time because I refused to do a social contract like that. A real social contract is that you, as a citizen, are agreeing to give up power to the leader or the government, in this case, in order for you to have protection. Now, there are different theories on how that social contract should be created. Rousseau believes that there are three states of nature. There's the state of nature, the state of man, and the state of society. The state of nature, it's brutal, it's vicious, it's very quick to die. The state of man, while not very quick to die, it is still brutal and it's still vicious because there's competition. The state of society is where we work together to further the goals of everyone. This is the social contract theory that many countries are guided on, along with John Locke. The idea of the state of society was that in order to reach that, I can't have total freedom. If I had total freedom, the government can't protect me. So I have to decide, what am I willing to give up in order to have protection? Am I willing to give up the right to no taxes? Am I willing to give up the right to free speech? Am I willing to give up the right to a fair trial? It depended on the society what they're willing to give up. Not every society believed in the same things. Rousseau did not say all societies had to follow his idea. What he said was that we all had to agree as our collective society, so French or English or American, what we wanted in order to be governed. Okay, so very important idea here to understand that social contract, there's so many different forms of it that it's probably one of the great things that I loved learning about when I was in college, when I was studying political science, because it's so different taught about how government works. We typically think of people being in charge. And it's not that we're not under social contract theory. What social contract theory is saying is that you still have to be willing to give up some of your power in order to form that government. If you don't understand, let me know and ask a question, or I can go over it again, because it's very difficult to understand social contract theory in its totality. We have Adam Smith, who was a English, I think Scottish, I might be wrong, philosophe who's economics. Adam Smith is the one who came up with laissez-faire economics, or the invisible hand. Okay, this is the beginnings of capitalism. He was the one that sets the world on its course for collision between capitalism and communism because of his ideas of a hands-off approach by the government. Now, at the time that he is writing, the British government is using what's known as mercantilism, or a very strict guided form of economics that very much limited the way that you could make money. And Adam Smith was arguing that we shouldn't be doing that. The government should not be involved in us making money. If we want to make money and we have an idea that people will buy, then we should be able to do it. There are different forms of capitalism. There is not just one form of capitalism. It's not an all or nothing equation. As we can see in modern European development, there is a balance that you can have between socialists, which is not communists, and we will go over that probably many, many times when we get to the 1800s, and capitalistic ideas. We have Voltaire. Voltaire is probably the most famous of all of these thinkers, if you were to ask me. Voltaire is also the one who was the most shocking of all of these thinkers for two reasons. One, Voltaire believed in the freedom of religion. And when we say freedom of religion, we mean true freedom of religion. Because for Voltaire, that meant freedom from religion. Voltaire was an atheist, an avowed public atheist. That was illegal in France. That was illegal in almost every single country at that time in Europe. You could not denounce the belief in God, but Voltaire did. Voltaire was a satirist. He wrote satire. He made fun of everybody and everybody. He made fun of the Pope. He made fun of King Louis XV and King Louis XVI. He made fun of the Russian Tsar and Tsarina at the time. He was so well known for his satire. He was actually invited by Frederick the Great to Prussia to publicly make fun of him. Excuse me. He became a sort of court entertainment in the Prussian court. Eventually, that's going to backfire on him, and he's going to get kicked out because you can only go so far. But he believed in the idea of free speech, that we should be able to say what we want. Voltaire was known to have had a long, like decades-long correspondence with Catherine the Great of Russia. In fact, she was a highly educated, very enlightened thinker prior to moving to Russia. And when she moved to Russia to become the Tsar, the Tsarina, to Peter III, I think is who her husband was, she killed him. She actually had to step back from the Enlightenment ideas because the Russians just weren't ready for it yet. But she herself still kept up the correspondence with Voltaire and tried to subtly influence Russian society and Russian aristocracy with the ideas that he had. But again, Voltaire, very shocking for that idea of freedom of religion, because he also believed in the idea that Jews should have equal rights in all countries. At that time, Jews were still living as non-citizens. What that meant is that if I was a Jew living in Paris and King Louis XVI decided he didn't like Jews anymore, which was very possible, didn't actually happen, but it could have, King Louis XVI could have said, okay, bye, you gotta go. You can't stay here anymore. And I would have to leave. I couldn't stay. I was not a citizen of France. Doesn't matter if I was born there, if I was married there, I raised my children there. Doesn't matter if my parents were from there or my grandparents. I was not a citizen of France and I could not stay. Voltaire believed that that should stop, that Jews should be welcomed as fully fledged members of society. So his belief that you should have freedom from religion and freedom of religion were very, very shocking. That's why he's probably the most well-known of all of these Enlightenment things. Now, Thomas Hobbes, he's a difficult one because he does give a social contract theory. In his social contract theory, there's two states. There's the state of nature, incredibly brutal, very short-lived, but you have all the rights in the world. And the other one is the state of man, where you give up those rights because you don't want to die. In that regard, he is an Enlightenment thinker. But Thomas Hobbes was an absolutist. He believed that the king should have absolute power. Because the state of nature was so brutal, the only way to have protection from death was if you gave all of your rights to the monarch. Now, here's why he's controversial in that regard. If the monarch abuses his power, so whether he's trying to overtax you, whether he's trying to kill you or something along those lines, then you have a right to overthrow the monarch. But not a democracy. You would put another absolute monarch in his place. So that's why it's very, very difficult to completely classify Hobbes as an Enlightenment thinker, because he's purporting absolutism. His book, The Leviathan, is commonly misunderstood as like a founding document of American democracy. It was so funny. I had a professor in college who would stand up and ask us how many of us knew this book, and almost everybody who had studied APUSH at least knows about the Leviathan. And he would say, how many of you think this is what helped form the American government? And all of our hands would go up. The book is actually that protects from ourselves. Without the Leviathan, it's this really dichotomy of overthrow the king if we don't like die with him, or be a king because it's the only way to prevent yourself from dying. And so it's just keep in the back of your mind that he did with that in his whole political sphere because he was not a democratic proponent. He did not believe in democracy, but he did believe in the right to overthrow your leaders. So a very, very interesting man to study. You have Locke. Locke is probably the one that is most well known in America because he's the one who gives us our three freedoms: to life, right to liberty, and the right to property. Okay? Happiness was not his thing, that person's. He actually came up with that. The three rights, those are the unalienable or God-given rights. Also social contract theorists. So in the state of nature, those are the three rights that you have, but there's no protection. In man, the way to protect your property, which to him was the most important, you have to give up parts of the other two. And so you give up your life in regards to you have to follow laws. You give up your liberty in regards to you can't kill people at once. You must stick within the confines of whatever box is created. John Locke also was a proponent of laissez-faire economics. He was not as strict a capitalist as Adam Smith. He did believe in government control in some regards. But John Locke is the one who you can really kind of say is the founding document creator of American democracy, even before he was alive. The reason I say that is because if you House of Burgesses, the Mayflower, or the Connecticut, I never remember what happened in Connecticut. The Connecticut Charter, and that. They all have remnants of like the beginning ideas. And then when Locke comes out and he writes his ideas in the 1600s, they're like solidified. And then the beginning take those ideas and expand upon them even further. Excuse me, sorry for being sick. Our last thing that we have on here is Mary Wollstonecraft. You were probably more with her daughter. Her daughter is the founder of the horror genre of writing and wrote one of the exposés on the horribleness of mankind ever written, in my opinion. It is Frankenstein. Mary Shelley was Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter. And Mary Shelley actually took her from her mother. Now, Wollstonecraft was British, living in the time frame of the French Revolution. And her vindication of the rights of woman was partly a direct response to a vindication of the rights of man, which was written by a French philosopher whose name I can't remember at the time. I'll look it up and I'll let you know. And she said, wait, we make it past the population. You cannot continue to ignore us. We led the March on Versailles. We led the Bastille. You have to give us rights. The Mary Wollstonecraft was very much for education of women. Her daughter, Mary Shelley, would be highly educated, speak multiple languages. She was married to the poet Percy Shelley. And the ideas that Mary Wollstonecraft had would shape the women's suffrage movement in the 1800s and early 1900s. In U.S. history, you learn about women's Seneca rights, the Falls Convention movements, and the rights of women is read there by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and I don't remember the other woman with her. I'll look it up and I'll let you know. And if you think that you need to know everything, I am proof right now you don't need to know everything. I do forget things, okay? It is okay to forget things, and it's okay to not know it all. Then what is the point of even trying anymore? Right? The whole point of trying and everything is to make yourself better. Okay. Let's say there's one thinker that is missing from this list. And that is Olympe de Gouges. Excuse me, Olympe de Gouges. She was a feminist, a very, very large, loud feminist of the French Revolution. She wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Citizen, because when the Declaration of Man and Citizen was written, it specifically excluded women. And Olympe de Gouges was not having it. So outspoken about it, it eventually is the reason that she is going to be put to death by the guillotine because of. So these are the big philosophers. You do need to know them. You need to know what they did. You need to know where they come from. I would really say that if you can remember these three things: social contract theory of Rousseau, Locke, and Hobbes. If you can remember government theory of Montesquieu and Locke, and you can remember the ethics or the social theory of Beccaria and Wollstonecraft, you can clump them together and make it easier for you to remember them. There are more, I think when I went over this with my students in my class, we would go over like 20 or 30 of them. It all aren't important. It's not that they all don't show up. It's just these are the big ones that I think you can take with you into your A+ class as well, because it will is Constitution. So just remember, if you can match the on the thinker, if you can remember the thinkers, you are well ahead of the development of the game. And you guys can do this. I believe that you all can do this, right? That's why you're going to get a 5, and we're here to help you get that 5. So how did these ideas spread? Well, these ideas start usually here, because you all think you can, most of the Philosophes are in France, right? We obviously saw a couple that were English and one German that were not. But the Salon was where they come from. Now today, when we think of a salon, we think about going to get our haircut, maybe our nails done, our skin, things like that. But if you've ever gone and paid attention, right? But a lot of hairstylists will describe themselves as like unofficial or untrained therapists, because people tell them all of their problems. That's kind of what a salon was. Right? They were discussing all of the problems of the time and trying to come up with ways to solve them. And between this typically nobles and the bourgeoisie, the very wealthy, the elite. If you've taken AP World History, your teacher might have had you read, 6 Glasses Around the World. The chapter about coffee talks about the use of coffee in salons, and how as coffee became a cheaper and cheaper drink, helped spread the ideas of Enlightenment to the lower classes, the less ed classes, because they would do the same, the problems of the day and how to solve them. Okay, salons typically, though, were actually governed by how women were asserting themselves during this time period. Rich women of the bourgeoisie, the nobility, would have a salon, invite people to come and discuss. One of the most famous women to salons was Madame de Pompadour, who was the mistress of King Louis XV. Yeah, King Louis XV? 14. I don't remember. I think it's King Louis XV. And they would discuss women's rights. They would discuss rights of, the lower classes, the rights of the nobility themselves. Should they have more or less rights? Women, the conversation. They would decide the topics. And if you didn't act properly, you would not be removed. You would be banned from all salons in the city. So you had to be on your best behavior. So we always times you hear about people making fun of salons today, but this is where they get it from. They're getting experience. Women saying, I want women to I'm going to get these men together and they're going to discuss it. I want punishment. How am I going to do it? I'm going to get these men together and they're going to discuss it. Okay? So next time you go with your mom to get a haircut, conversations going on around you. Listen to how problems they have and how they're trying to work together to solve them. It's a great continuity, keyword, continuity, that you can talk about. Salons have evolved not just be a place to get your haircut. They evolved from this political sphere to be a place to discussion of philosophy and psychology. Little did you know you were going to learn about hair salons today, right? This is where I think you need to pay particular attention, okay? And this is because we have a massive problem in the United States of a misunderstanding of this time period. Okay, a lot of times you hear that the United States was founded as a Judeo-Christian nation. They're not right, but they're not wrong. Okay? And this is why. They're not right because we weren't. Okay, we were founded specifically as a non-religious nation. Okay, we go away to Great Britain, which was a Christian Anglican nation. Lived in the colonies was Anglican, which meant that they were paying higher taxes than those that weren't. So we were not founded as a Judeo-Christian nation. We were founded as a nation. So they're wrong in that regards. They are right because of the idea of deism. Almost all of our founding fathers believed in this idea of deism. Deism was a religious belief. You can kind of call it a religion. I would say it's not. Anybody could be a deist, whether they're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or Buddhist. It was more of a philosophy in how you view the world and your place within the world. Deism meant you looked at God kind of as like a clockmaker. That's why you see this picture of a clock, right? And God wound the clock up, and then the clock starts ticking. Well, once you wind the clock up, the clock just keeps going. You don't need to do anything. Okay, so God created everything. There is God, but that's it. After that, you don't have to agree. You don't have to believe in Christ. You don't have to believe in Muhammad. You don't have to believe in Moses. You don't have to believe in Buddha. As long as you believe in God, you can be a deist. Once God created the world, God stepped back, and God is no longer involved. It's the idea that God is passive, not active. And that is the antithesis to Christian doctrine. Okay, it's the antithesis to the idea that you can pray to God and God is going to intervene on your behalf. That's why it's so shocking for a lot of people to kind of wrap their minds around it, because we are a relatively religious nation compared to most other Western nations. For Catholics, the idea that God not being in your life was very hard for them to wrap their minds around. It was not impossible, but it was almost there. The Catholic Church as a whole in Europe obviously was much less important because of the Protestant Reformation. Its power had been taken away due to the scientific revolution, and now we have the Enlightenment, which is weakening it even more, because the Enlightenment allows you to question your place in society and your place in the world, in the heavens, and things like that. Within the Protestant Church, the Protestants already had a history of questioning. Protestants already had that history of it being okay to have doubt. And so deism, again, I don't think you would call it a religion. It's more of just a philosophy. Okay, this was the philosophy of almost all of the major thinkers on the Enlightenment, and I would say all of the founders of the United States government. They were deists. That's why when you read the Constitution, it says that we are endowed by your creator. It doesn't specify, because not everybody who lived in America was Christian. We had Jews, we had Muslims that lived there at that time. We had the Native Americans who lived there that all had their beliefs. So the specific use of the word creator, that's a telling way to know that they were deists and that they believed in God, but they believed that everyone's God was their God and we don't need to force it on you. This might be very controversial to tell you I'm full of baloney, and that's their right. But again, I think it's very important for you to understand that deism is not saying there is no God. It's not saying there is no Christ. What deism was saying is that your belief doesn't have to match my belief, as long as we believe that God created it all and we're trying to make everybody. Okay? That's why I say that the belief that the United States is a Judeo-Christian nation is wrong, and it's right. Okay, controversial, but the whole idea of star states was controversial itself, right? That's why we wouldn't say it was the shot heard around the world for nothing. But just remember, deism is the idea of clockmaker. He sets the clock up, he winds the clock, and then he lets it go. He steps back. So the effects on Europe as the effects on the world. Right after this cast, you're going to be going over enlightened absolutism, also known as the Enlightened Debts with Bella Blanton. The Enlightenment does have an effect on the absolutist rulers. They are going to take the ideas in the Enlightenment to help their people, but they're being their people because they're securing their power. So it's very like, let me see how I can manipulate you to follow what I want, because I'm going to give you just a bit of the crumbs to make you think that I'm making life better, right? The Enlightenment allows for the coming of the bourgeoisie, this new social class, the middle class. You hear it all the time if you watch the news, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they're always talking about the middle class, because the Enlightenment was focused on the middle class. The Enlightenment was about making the middle class better because they believed if you did that, you would help everyone. The Enlightenment does lead to revolutions. Obviously, the American Revolution is the one that we most think of, as well as the French Revolution. But it leads to revolutions elsewhere in Europe. You have the Greek, the Serbian, you have the Belgian, you have the Dutch, you have the German, you have the Russian, you have the Italian, you've got the Austrian, you have the Hungarian, you have the Polish. All of these revolutions in the early 1800s, and then 1848, my God, 1848 has a lot of revolutions. That's an unintended consequence. Latin America has revolutions, all based off the Enlightenment and the ideas of the Enlightenment. The ideas that they started would shape how government is created in former colonies of the European nations in Africa and in Asia. And it leads to a massive rise in skepticism. This is more what we are going to look at as modern skepticism, where you have modern secularism. It's the idea that tradition is not always right. In fact, tradition is usually wrong, and that we need to look at things in our own view. We need to look at it with our own history and our own opinion and change it if possible. We don't have to follow what the church said simply because the church said it, which led to the current world we have today. You know, over 80% of France is Catholic, but if you go to them and you ask them when the last time they went to Catholic Mass was, most of them will say it hasn't been since they were baptized. Okay, they're skeptical of the church. They're skeptical of the traditions of the church. The United States, we have a lot of people that go to church, but they compartmentalize the way that it works within their life, because we've been raised to have our own viewpoints, that we can go to church and follow that, but we don't have to do it in all aspects of our life. That's different from this time period. Prior to this, the church affected you in one way or another in all aspects. Even if you tried to separate them, they still affected you. So the effects, we're still feeling the effects. We're still living in the time of the Enlightenment, if you ask me. Why democracy is an experiment. It is not set in stone yet whether this is a good form of government. In my Absolutism and Constitutionalism cast, I talked about how, you know, for the better part of history, when we go all the way back to the beginning of society, monarchy was the best because it's the most stable. Democracy is very, very young. It's proven to be very unstable. And so only time will tell whether the Enlightenment ideas and democracy truly were better for the world. Who knows? It might not be. Thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate it. Make sure, again, you follow Think Fiveable on Twitter, on Instagram, and YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at USTeachNNZ. And make sure you join Bella. She's going to be coming on in about 10 minutes. She's going to be going over those individual enlightened absolutists, or enlightened despots, as they're sometimes called. And I will see you guys next time. Kia kaha.